Welcome back. Today we're going to spend a few words on the TRN V90 from someone who has a ZSX and likes that a whole lot. So you can call that impartial, but it is what it is. I really like the ZSX, but I was super curious about how the V90 does and why people continue to talk about it and love it. So that was why I bought it. So here we go. So first, just looking at them, side by side, absolutely love the V90's aluminum shell. This is the midnight blue version. Let's see. So this is the midnight blue version with this fancy new TRN T2 gray pewter dull silver, whatever you want to call it, cable, which is amazingly beautiful as well. And I think the two really go well together. From the box, I didn't like the standard tips, so these are some cheap Amazon foam tips. 16 core cable, so it's pretty similar to how I had the ZSX set up, except that no foam tips on that guy. So that's that. So probably love the aluminum shell a little more than that, but I think everyone would say the same thing. So most reviews will start out with the charts, and I will tell you not to look at the charts, but here are the charts. So this was the original one I showed with the ZSX, and this was the ZSX versus the ZS10. And I said, don't pay attention to this. This is just quantity of sound, and you're basically looking at the ZSX sounding really similar to the ZS10 Pro. And I said, ignore that because it actually sounds better when it's in your ears, and pay attention to that, not the chart. So we'll say kind of similar things about the V90, except the V90 has this problem. This is kind of a big dip in the midsection, and everyone who has a V90 says you got to listen to it, ignore the chart. There is no recessed mids. It just doesn't chart well. Okay, so we'll go with that. So sound-wise, we'll kind of start out with the story behind both of these guys. So the ZS10 was successful, the predecessor to this guy. Its biggest issue was that the treble and sort of the natural timbres of certain instruments were called steely, right? So it was a great sounding, yet not overly natural sounding earphone, which is pretty standard for KZ. I never had the V80, so I don't remember what the V80 problems were. But the V90 basically sets itself apart by saying it is, a natural sounding, the most natural sounding balanced earphone that'll kind of work both for casual users and professional or studio or reference users, whatever you want to call it. So that's somewhat of the difference, whereas they both shot for more natural for a hybrid than their predecessors were. But this guy, KZ, almost always tunes for a likable, fun, energetic sound. If you read about the tuning on this, he basically says that they wanted something that would cover both people who love bass in their head and who can also listen to classical or jazz or more reference professional users. So that's sort of the bulk of the difference between the two, and why I think people sort of buy one of the other ones. Everyone sort of knows that when you buy a KZ, it's going to be a super fun sound. The V90 was kind of shooting a little higher, trying to cover both markets at the same time. And that's probably most apparent on the bass side. So the ZSX, copper cable, fitting seals, it is pretty much bass head, tons of rumble. The punch is definitely punchy, but not as defined nearly as much as like a TFZ number 3. That's been KZ's thing. They never really get a well-defined bass all that to be as defined as it really should be for professional level classical or jazz. But again, they don't necessarily shoot for that. They want something that people are going to bob their head to, and that's kind of what the ZSX does in spades. This guy, definitely punchier, definitely more defined, definitely faster. There's a song called Fast Cars by Jonas Blue. It starts off with a few bass hits, and on this guy it's not clinical, but it's very fast, you know, bang, bang, bang. This guy, it almost sounds lethargic. It's just like a big floaty bass wall in your head. And that sounds bad, but if you're tend towards a bass head, it sounds absolutely amazing. It's what carries you through note to note, is this, you know, sweet, warm bass that kind of carries through. And this is definitely more jazz style, fast, quick decay. And so on paper, I think people always give the V90 that edge because from a technical standpoint, it's faster and more defined. This is more bass head style, rap, pop, EDM. You definitely want that warm, slower decay, reggae. But if you're going to put it on a chart, you're probably going to have to give the points to this guy because of what it can do for more of a range of bass styles and the speed of it. So that's the bass. So the mids, again, remember I said, you know, ignore the bulge in between these guys, but you really can't. It really bothered me, and coming from the blonde, coming from the ZSX, the mids and the vocals are noticeably recessed, and you can swear to me up and down that it's because I looked at the chart or I'm biased because I like the ZSX. Just no way. Just the vocals on, especially the blonde, the vocals are amazing, and the ZSX, they're not quite as amazing. They're really, really close, but they're very forward, very in your head. Whereas the V90, I mean, the vocals are kind of now pushing out away from your head, and they're not as detailed as the ZSX. And this, you know, again, people either say ignore the recessed mids or it only affects the lower mids. But for me, Drake, you can't get Drake right on these things. His voice is just not right. The timbre, his natural, you know, texture and tone and timbre of Drake's voice just doesn't come through on this because it's just slightly recessed. Drake on the blonde, Drake on the ZSX, he is between your ears. You're in the studio. It is absolutely transparent how good it sounds. And you're just missing that on these guys. But, you know, switch to a higher female voice, and then you're getting, you know, it's kind of more in line with where it should be. But, you know, for me, it's kind of the Achilles heel of this guy is if you can't do the vocals right. As I go through my playlist, the ZSX was kind of my playlist terminator. You just go through your whole playlist and everything sounds generally just right. This guy is a little more hit and miss. But, you know, if you don't listen to a wide range of music and it sounds fine for you, then yeah, I perfectly understand why things sound just as natural on the V90 as they do on the ZSX. But for me, not so much. The treble is kind of more of a half and half. It comes down to your preference. ZSX sort of traded off detail for being able to go louder. It's kind of more in balance. The treble and the bass are definitely more in line. So you don't get the peakiness on the treble, which the V90 hopes that you're getting more detail. So they traded off detail for being able to go louder. This, you won't be able to go as loud because it'll get peaky, but the thought is you'll get more detail. You know, it comes down to a preference thing. I prefer to go louder than eking out some details, you know, way over here on the chart. But like I said, it's hard to say. I've seen people say, well, the ZSX treble's better, the V90 is better. It's up to you how you prefer to have your treble trail off like that. I'll take louder almost any day over some detail that I probably didn't know I missed. So the last kind of bit where the two kind of diverge are at the soundstage. And for the life of me, I've seen people say this is wide. There's just no way. not on this planet. Maybe you guys have some amp and some cable and some tips where this thing magically sounds wide, but there's just no way. You listen to the ZSX, listen to the Blonde, that is what wide sounds like. This sounds exactly like it's between your ears. If it goes, you know, an inch beyond your ear, maybe, but there's just no way. I don't know what people were saying that this thing goes wide. If you think this is wide, you'll be disappointed. Instrument separation wise, it's not so bad, but again, it's actually better on the ZSX. And again, this little hump thing where you can say ignore it, but when it comes to instrument separation and you get this magic combination of either a vocal, especially a vocal for me, a vocal in a lower range and instruments, the instruments tend to clobber this. So instead of hearing the vocal, you're basically hearing, because number one, the sound is so much in your head, there's no real space between the vocals and the instruments. And now the instruments are playing on top of the vocals and I'd be lying if I said it happened all the time, but there's just certain songs where that happened, and that kind of bugged me too. But like they say, it tends to get lost in the mix on certain songs, and you can deny that all you want, but it's there and it's real. So that's my take. You guys know I love the ZSX. I was super interested in the V90. I wanted to try it out, and kind of that was my take on it. And I know that it's not really going to convince any V90 people to go buy a ZSX, and that wasn't my point. But for guys who were KZ guys like me, whoever were curious about what a V90 sounded like and why people talk about it, it's, you know, it's a ZSX, but it can do probably some genres that the ZSX kind of struggles at, where they get more technical, classical or jazz. And this really shot for that middle ground of being able to go for those two markets, genres. ZSX, it shoots for what it shoots for, and it's very successful at doing that. And it's hard to deny how good it is. This is good at what it does, but perhaps this is better at what it does versus this trying to cover both, if you know what I mean. It's just not the jack of all trades that it should be. They maybe should have focused on one or the other, and they would have been more successful in my eyes. So that's it. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.